What an honor to be here and to speak with you and connect with you today. And so one of the things I really wanted to talk about is this presence of the divine in us and the magic and power of the unity principles and the principles of metaphysics. Because in my life, they have been truly magic. And so when I was around 4 or 5, I would run around the block. There was a lot going on at home. My mother had schizophrenia, and there was a lot of abuse in many different ways. And home wasn't safe, so I was always outside. And I was like this intense little athlete, even when I was tiny. And I would run around the block, and I would feel my heart. And that was my first encounter of the divine energy in us. Because I thought it was so magic that my body, my heart could beat like that. And I knew that that presence of that energy was not me. So it was my first experience of realizing that I was not the universe. Because when you're a kid, you know, they're egocentric. And so ever since I was little, I became so fascinated with the human body. And so around 5 years old, I encountered my uncle, who's a natural healer near Princeton, New Jersey. And he had this microscope, and this microscope was connected to this very large screen. And he was looking at blood cells. And so I would follow him around everywhere. He was this brilliant man, he still is. He can cure anything I've ever seen. And so I would follow him into his huge library. That's where my love of books came from, that my mom. And I would continually like to pester, I was like his little shadow, and he showed me what the blood looked like under the microscope. And I was like mesmerized by what I saw, because it wasn't just the cell on that screen. It was the energy behind the cell. I saw this light, and then I saw all these other little figures under that microscope. But what really drew me was the magic of that light, even when I was little. And in that moment, I knew I would spend the rest of my life figuring out what was on that screen. Little did I know the journeys that it would take me to. Because my life has, for the first 25 years, it was always about science. My mom was so sick growing up. I saw she had severe schizophrenia and cerebral palsy and many other things. And I saw her be so crippled in that bed. I watched her come in and out of reality. There was no structure in the home. We grew up in poverty, and there was a lot of other abuse going on in the home, sexual included. And so I grew up in this constant chaos of what a home should not be like. But in the corner of my mother's room was the Virgin Mother. And underneath the Virgin Mother was this book structure that had the Serenity Prayer on it. And I remember looking at my mother in bed, which she was for many, many decades. And I would stand by the Virgin Mother and I would look at her and I'd be like, what's going on? Why is this the way it is? My mother was this beautiful soul that loved animals. She loved animals. I remember us going for walks and all the animals, so similar to Jilly. And so, little Jilly, that the animals would find her, and then all the kids in the neighborhood loved my mother, but she was so incredibly compromised and really couldn't be and live a life the way we live. And so I remember standing by this Virgin Mother, and I would feel the presence of the Virgin Mother. And so she became my mother figure, this presence in the background of all this chaos. And so I spent a lot of time outside. It was safe outside. And it was at that time that my intuitive gift found me. Because I didn't have parents that could really keep me protected a lot of the time. I had a wonderful grandmother that would come in and out sometimes. But a lot of the time I was on my own at a very early age. And so this intuitive presence and this voice would guide me. They'd be like, go to the park, it's safe there. Go to these woods, you're going to be safe there. And so it was that presence followed me for many, many, many years. And at that time, I didn't quite understand it. I just knew that there was some extra presence that I had that was keeping me safe and to trust it. And I remember at 12 years old, sitting by the water, and I would start to write. And that's where the intuitive presence would come through. And so how many people here have intuitive gifts? Okay, awesome. And so one of the gifts of encountering First Unity 25 years ago was that I encountered a minister that really talked about the intuitive gift and the value of that intuitive gift and the power of that intuitive gift. And so and how I encountered dear Jeremy, who I call my intuitive brother, was that at a time when my life was falling apart, and I'll go back to that in a second, we both attended Reverend Reka's intuitive development class. For years, we would meet every Tuesday, and we would bring food, and we would listen to Reverend Reka talk in different ways. And she had all these Reka-isms, like 911, Mr. God, and do your homework. Little did I know that do your homework really meant looking at yourself and encountering all the areas of the self that are hard to look at, to feel, to release, to heal, to overcome, but spiritually, and using these spiritual tools that Unity teaches and metaphysical, the metaphysical community really teaches, to use those tools to look at ourselves, to get better and stronger, and to heal things that maybe we could never ever imagine healing. And so I grew up really focused on achievement. It was a one-way out. My brain did not work like everybody else's. I had severe ADHD, which now I know was trauma-induced. Trauma changes the brain. And so, but I was obsessed with achievement. So I would almost always get straight A's. I was, an athlete. I ended up going to college, playing basketball and running cross country. But I became obsessed because my internal world was so incredibly broken and chaotic. I couldn't find peace anywhere. And I said, okay, well, the answer is money. The answer is looking good on the outside. And that's where I'm going to spend my whole everything looking or investing in, right? So did that for 25 years. Ended up going to Eckerd College, did a triple undergrad, which is ridiculous. Who does that? And so books were safe, right? Books were safe to me, so I hid in books. And I always loved cells. And at that time, I was still in contact with my uncle. And I realized that was the path I wanted to go. But medical school didn't teach about nutrition. They didn't teach about the cell. And I looked at the curriculum, and at the end of my college career, I had to make a decision. Am I going to go for what I really love and fix things at the core, or am I going to go the traditional route and be an MD and not learn anything to be able to fix anything in terms of what I knew in my core self, like really fix it, not just medicate? And so I was like, I have to follow what I love. And so I chose not to go that route. I chose to end up going for a master's degree in nutrition and then ultimately chiropractic school. But there was a lot of stuff in the middle that happened. I ended up losing $1 million in real estate to a toxic relationship, which meant all of my outside achievement crashed. And I hit the worst time period of my life. I was totally black inside. I had no tools of Unity. I had no tools of metaphysics yet. And I wanted to die for like 2 years. I had gotten to a horribly abusive relationship, wrapped my real estate portfolio up in that, and then I lost it when she decided to leave. And so it was that moment where my journey took this amazing turn, because it forced me to reach for new healing tools. Because my family didn't teach me about emotional healing or spiritual healing. My father was very focused on money. That was his world, but that was his focus. Outside, what we looked at on the outside, and his focus. He was a good guy overall. But I wasn't modeled. Like, how do you heal? How do you heal when you're violated at that level as a kid? How do you really get rid of the blackness? Because even though I looked good on the outside at 20, I hated myself. I couldn't understand how people could be happy. I would look into their eyes, and that's what I saw at Unity, is that I saw people that had hope in their eyes, and they had this hope and joy. And I couldn't figure out how to connect to that frequency, because I was like, well, I've been trying so hard to acquire this stuff, thinking that it would make me happy, but I knew that it wasn't gonna give me what I saw in those people's eyes. So I was like, so I kept coming back. And at Unity, I went to I was at a 12-step recovery meeting. I ended up reaching for new tools, which was 12-step recovery, which was one of the best things I ever did. But that meeting was at that church. And so I saw all the little Unity things on the wall at that 12-step recovery meeting, and that's what brought me into First Unity. And so a lot of things happened after I lost everything. I started reaching for tools, and I remember at that time I was struggling so badly with depression. Like, not just a little bit down, like in my bed, so incredibly compromised, I could not even get up. Like, I was a teacher at the time, taught science to a bunch of teenagers. I loved them, but all I could do was get up to go to work, come home, hide under the covers with my 4 cats, and just beg God to get better. And I did that for I think it was 12 years. I could not function like everybody else. The trauma, the brain inflammation, all the things that I didn't have any of the tools I have now, but I was so compromised, I would beg God to either take me off the planet or give me an answer. And so there was a moment when it was 3 o'clock in the morning, and I said, God, if you teach me how to climb out of this and live a normal life, I will spend the rest of my life teaching people how to do it. And it was just a few days later that I encountered a recording by Abraham Hicks that was on the metaphysics of emotion. And from up until that point, I thought emotion was all about neurotransmitters. I thought I loved cells, biochemistry was my thing. I had this belief that our emotional reality was connected only to the physical structure of the cell, only to the physical structure of the brain. And when I understood that metaphysical concept, that emotions were frequency, then it gave me the power to shift it. And from then on, I started to dig deeper into the metaphysics and the tools, and all the different tools along that journey are in that book. And so one of the reasons why I wrote that book was, when you make a deal with God, you have to follow through. So that's what the book over there is, a healing manual with all those tools. And so, these unity principles and these tools of metaphysics are not just words to me. They have saved my life time and time and time again. And every time I have been at the bottom, the blackest, not wanting to be here, wanting off this earth so bad, and it has been those metaphysical and spiritual tools that have helped me climb out of the blackest muck, except one time, and that's when I gave up on them. And so, I'm going to tell you a story, and it's one of the sacred stories of my life. I've never done it, actually, I've never shared this story in front of a church before. And so, I was hit by a car, and I destroyed parts of my spine, so I was in extreme pain. And the inflammation hit my brain, and my brain stopped working. And I went to all these doctors, I went to all these therapists, I tried everything, and nobody could bring back my brain, and they gave me no hope. They just wanted to give me a diagnosis label and say, here's your 1 or 2 medications, and we're not sure if it's gonna come back, and there you go. This went on for months. It wasn't just like a tiny part. So, and the more that it went on, my family and the doctors kept giving me worse and worse diagnoses and believing them. That this was a psychiatric illness unrelated to trauma, because there were some things that activated my trauma triggers in the background, and that my brain wouldn't come back, and this was simply my label, and I would be categorized over here. Well, I saw what the medical community did to my mother, and I said, you know what, I'm not doing this. I'm out. Because of the trauma, it's always been taking me a lot of effort and energy just to want to be here. But this is too much for me to take out my brain after all that I've invested and everything else. I want off the planet. Well, if anybody that knows me, I don't do anything halfway. So I'm like, if this is my decision, I'm going to make sure that I am taken out, and I'm going to research how to take myself off the planet. And I did. I researched all the statistics, so I knew which one. I knew that I couldn't have firearms. I couldn't do that to myself. But I knew that if I jumped off the Skyway Bridge, that I would die. That was a statistic. That was in my research, which I did plenty of. That was the one way to go. So one morning I woke up, drove to the top of the Skyway Bridge, and jumped. And as I was falling, I said, oh my God, I don't want to die. Because I had given up on my faith. I couldn't hear my angels, because that had been my saving grace my whole life. And the brain inflammation, I cut it off, and the pain was so unbearable, and the labeling was the worst, because it gave me no hope. I lost my hope. And that's the value of metaphysics and these unity principles, is the hope that they provide. And so as I'm following, the thing I never understood was why don't I ever remember hitting. It was 19 stories, so it's almost concrete when you hit. And so, and somebody said to me once, had you not blacked out before you hit, it would have been the holding of the breath that would have destroyed your lungs, and you would have died right then when you hit. So I always believed that my angels knocked me out before I hit, and it broke my femur, it broke my ankle, my back, and my shoulder. And so there were 4 men. So I remember opening my eyes 4 inches from the top of the water. And I was not happy when I woke up, because I was like, oh no, anyway. It was like a moment of panic, and I was mad at God that he didn't take me. And so 20 feet from where I landed were 4 fishermen in a boat. They were all trained in trauma recovery, and they were on vacation, and they had high specialty training on exactly what to do in a situation like that. They pulled me out, it ripped off my clothes except one sneaker. And I remember laying in that boat, hitting the waves on my way to the trauma unit, and water droplets hitting me. And I remember that very distinctly. What will my life be now? I have just hurt everybody in my world. I have just embarrassed myself at the highest level. And I can no longer teach. What will my life become? And so I've had many conversations with Jeremy. He's family to me. Very grateful for Jeremy in my life. And we talk about that moment being my rebirth, that something had to die in front of me before I could really live. And I've really thought about that for 13 years. It was 13 years ago. And my ego had to die at the highest level in order for me to really live. I was so attached to materialism and stuff and what people thought of me and all of those things that really don't matter. And I was so broken and so focused on the wrong things. And so I was laying in the hospital room, terrified, because Reverend Linda McLeod was coming. And Reverend Linda, I adore her at the highest level. She's always been kind of a maternal figure, but oh, is she hard on me. I adore her, but oh. And so and I was terrified, so I knew she was coming. I'm laying in bed all broken, and she walks in. Because she knew something was up before it happened, and she tried so hard to step in. But for anybody that has lost someone to suicide, know that when you're in that space of blackness, and you've made that decision to leave, there is nothing anyone can ever say to you that will change your mind. When you're really there and you're really committed, when you've made that soul decision to try to leave, there's nothing anybody could have said, because Linda tried. Reverend Linda, she called me at least 25 times that week, checking on me, knowing that something was not right. And so I always say that, because I often hear, oh, I could have done A, B, and C to save them. No. When you're really there, when you're ready, it's time, there's nothing anybody could have ever said to have changed that decision in that moment. So I'm in the hospital room, and she walks in, and she looks at me, and I'm like, uh-oh. And she goes, well, you can't feel sorry for yourself. And here I am all broken. That's what I was doing, sitting there. You can't feel sorry for yourself. What are you going to do now? No empathy. And I knew she was mad. And but I know that she loved me so much. And so, but it made me think, well, what am I going to do? I can't even walk to go to the bathroom. And so often, I was so black inside for so many months, and I was in the hospital for many months, different rehab facilities and whatnot, but I would open my eyes often, and there would be 12 to 14 people in the room, chaplains from First Unity. And they would hold this sacred space for my heart when I couldn't find the light. Again and again and again, through months and months, these people would come and find me in the blackness, and they would shine their light and love at me. Donna was one of them. Donna was one of them in that room when I woke up. And that meant so much to me. That meant more to me than anything, because I didn't really have that level of support throughout my life, and to know that in my weakest moment, when I had given up on everything Unity had ever taught me, and I loved Unity, and I loved metaphysics, But in that moment when I had given that all up to fear of just wanting to leave and giving up on these principles, it was the love of the spiritual community that showed up again and again and again for months and months and months, and carried my soul through that experience in a way I will never forget. And so, you know, there's one of my dear friends that is transitioning. And this woman is extremely, I don't know if she's gone yet from the planet. But when I think about her, I think of the love and the beauty and the light that we all give to each other. Because in these moments, even if our life isn't together, even if we have stuff going on, we have this opportunity of connecting to each other and to bring the light and to bring our hearts and to really love each other. And the magic and the transformative power of that love is truly limitless. And this woman, her name is Dina, and she was this powerhouse. She was 86, and if I lived 86 and lived the life she lived, I would have been doing great. And so she always believed in me. She always saw the potential of who I was. And I lead a moon ceremony on Gulfport Beach once a month, full moon ceremony. And she would come every single time, first one there, put her chair, even when I was in the beginning and I was new to it, I didn't even know if I was supposed to be out there, you know, spiritually. She'd sit her chair and say, I'm here, and I'm so proud. She would be like beaming, and she would believe in me at the core level. And she would say, when she heard that I didn't have a mom growing up, that was when she found that out somehow. She walked up to me, she said, I'll be your mom. Oh. So, the power of the heart that we share with each other and the power of these principles are really limitless. And I wanted to share with you just some of the things, some of the metaphysical principles that have carried me through the worst moments, have carried me through to the healing. You know, these aren't just words, these unity principles and these spiritual beliefs and these metaphysical tools. They're not just words. They have every single time carried me out of brain injuries, you know, the blackest of depressions, even after the suicide attempt, losing everything, heartbreaks. Oh, the heartbreaks I've had because of my bad choices, but we won't talk about that. But these principles, if we choose to believe in them with our whole hearts and take action and apply them, they can really carry us through everything. And the things that maybe we are wobbly going through, we have each other. I believe that we are angels for each other. I have a couple angels in this room, Jeremy, Angie, certainly Juliana. And that no matter what we're going through, we can always show up to serve. And I believe that joy is in service. And so there are a few metaphysical principles that I just wanted to share that I apply in almost every area of my life, specifically in the healing work I do on myself and in my healing practice and in my intuitive work with people, is that, you know, we are frequency. We are energy. If you look even at the cell and the atom, I believe it's over 90% of the cell is empty space. We are energy. And when we are able to commit to increasing our vibration every single day, our lives transform. Whether that be the words we speak, the thoughts we think, the self-talk, whether it be the foods that we eat, the vibration of the foods, whether it be, you know, pondering what's on our heart. Are we choosing anger or forgiveness? Are we letting go of the things we can't control? Whether it be our environments. Are we in supportive, energetic environments or relationships? And so when I understood at the core level that emotion was a frequency, that gave me the power to shift everything in my life. And that was the most transformative metaphysical principle of my life, and the belief that my angels were everywhere and that I was always being supported somehow. Because in those dark places, I don't know how many of you have really, really been there, you can't find the light. There is no light anywhere. And so after a while, you start to believe the darkness because it is that dark. And so I've been through it so many times. I have been knocked down so many times in my life. I think that's the gift that I bring and the experience that I bring. That I've learned to trust that the light is always there behind the darkness. I have learned to look at whatever situation. Most recently, it has been 4 major accounts with mold that took out my brain most recently. But when we're in that position of being at the bottom, of really being at the bottom of the muck, and the grief and the sad and the loss and maybe the no hope and the despair, I believe now that it is a moment of transformation, because we have a choice at the bottom. We can believe the blackness. Well, guess what? That doesn't. I'm proof that doesn't really bring much good to your life when you believe the darkness, because the darkness will always talk smack to you when you're in that space. Your mind will always talk something that is usually not positive. But in that muck, in the bottom, we have a choice. Do we believe in the light? Do we believe in a spiritual reality? Do we believe in these metaphysical principles? Do we believe we have the internal power to step up and embrace our faith when there's no light anywhere? We have that choice at the bottom, because if we stay at the bottom, the darkness will eat you. And there have been moments when I've been right there, many times, tangoing with that blackness and darkness, especially if you've gone through some heavy stuff, like incest, sexual abuse, or trauma in the family, or abandonment, or neglect, or whatever it might be, loss, abuse. When you're really there in that energy, we have a choice. Do we believe that our angels are right there? Do we believe that presence of the divine is right there with us? And there have been a couple times when the universe has handed me a situation where I didn't want to believe. I was like, I'm done with this. This can't be my reality. My brain being taken out again in my life? Oh no. After I've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars investing on my brain and my brain's not working, are you kidding me, God? There have been many times I've been angry at God. But that never brought me any peace, and it certainly didn't bring me any answers. So usually after going through that experience, my next thought in the spiritual realm is, okay, what is this teaching me? What am I going to learn through this situation? What is the divine doing? How is the divine lining up things perfectly for the next chapter of my life? And so a couple years ago, I was going through chiropractic school, and I got rear-ended by a car, and it was this rinky-dink little accident, but it sloshed my brain against my skull, and it gave me post-concussive syndrome really, really bad. The level of pain was something I had never experienced before, and I couldn't use my brain, and I had to pull out of chiropractic school. And so I didn't have any money. I didn't really have a lot of family around that was supportive during the time in terms of understanding that it was a brain injury and not a psychiatric one. And so, but laying in the bed, the brain injury took out the left side of my brain, and I could feel where my angels were standing. I could feel the vibration of where they were standing. And at that time, my thoughts were not working. I'd think of something, and normally your brain kicks into the answer, but my brain wouldn't kick into the answer. And so my angels would show me the pictures of the answer. And little by little, they brought me out of that situation twice, because I get hit again 3 months later. And so when you're really at that place of wanting to give up hope, of not wanting to embrace faith, of wanting to believe the ego mind, I ask you to choose a metaphysical tool. And I'm such a big believer in these tools because they gave me a way out of the blackness. They gave me a way out of the self-hate and the addiction. My addiction wasn't regular alcohol and drugs. It was horrible, toxic, narcissistic relationships that would cut me at my core. It was the most debilitating experience. But that was my addiction. It was a love addiction. It was a connection addiction. And I couldn't, but any addiction always is just trying to distract from emotion. Because the emotion of being abused and abandoned and neglected for so long as a kid was so embedded in my cells. And a lot of the principles that I teach in that book and just in my healing practice is as we increase the healing frequency of our bodies and our brains, and we flow the currency of that universal divine frequency through us, our cells start releasing the emotional energy. And so I watch that when people are on my wellness programs and really doing it. At specific times along their healing progress, they'll have these emotional releases, so intense sometimes that they'll quit because they're so scared of the emotion. But these metaphysical tools are not little. There are so many different ones to help shift emotional energy. And for me, emotional energy and physical energy is the same, and it will express as dis-ease or imbalance or physical dysfunction in many, many different ways. And I see that all the time, no matter what people come to me for, whether it be, thyroid stuff or, pain stuff or back stuff or brain stuff. It's all about figuring out how do we flow that energy of the divine, that frequency of the universe through us most effectively so we can heal not just our brains, not just our bodies, but our hearts and our spirit. And so these tools, whether that be spiritual books of unity, whether that be metaphysical tools that work on aligning our chakras, or our meridians if you're going the Chinese medicine route, or our auric field. There are so many tools that metaphysics provides to help us remove our emotional blocks and connect to the energy of the universe and the divine more strongly and more comprehensively through our bodies, minds, hearts, and spirits. And so I've just started to get into pendulum work the last couple of years. And I am amazed at the ability of the pendulum to shift emotional energy and remove energy blocks and to remove belief systems. And that's just one of the tools. But there are everything from crystals to affirmations to meditation to auric stuff to working with color, Bach remedies. So there are so many tools out there. So what I guess I want you to always remember from this talk is that when you're really there in the muck, reach out and choose a tool. And so I know that all of us here have stories of overcoming. I've never seen anybody that's drawn to unity that aren't really strong people with beautiful hearts that have really walked through some really challenging things. And I believe that we're all spiritual warriors in some ways. And if we all heard each other's stories, we would be so proud of each other that we're actually here in this building today, waking up and coming and connecting today. And so every moment we have is a miracle. You are the miracle. That moment to this one, we, after almost, not dying, but it made me really look at each moment and it made me ask myself, what am I going to do with this moment? Not yesterday, not tomorrow. What can I do with this moment to make a difference? Whether that be to reach out and connect to somebody struggling, whether that be to show up with my heart in some way for an animal or a child or somebody that maybe hasn't found these principles yet. This moment is the miracle, or maybe it's to take better care of myself so that I can be of greater service later, or to heal deeper and face my deepest emotional stuff so that it doesn't hurt me and the people that love me anymore. But this power, this moment has such power and potential in it. And so these principles always work. That's the thing. They always work. And I, at my weakest moments of my life and most challenging situations of my life, I wanted to doubt them. But every time as I pondered in meditation, or I do a lot of walking meditation, and these principles, the unity principles and the metaphysical principles are always working. The question for me, and I've been really going deeper lately, the question is, how do we disconnect ourselves from source? Like, what are the ways when we really get honest with ourselves? Because I recognized early that I was lying to myself about a lot of things. And so, I'm really committed to growth and healing. It's been the journey of my life, and it has saved my life in many different ways. And so when I really look at my relationship with the unity principles, my relationship with metaphysical principles, usually it's me taking myself away from them in some way. And I had to look at my connection to source. What was really blocking my connection to source And was I following the unity principles and the metaphysical principles that I love so much? And was I really following the cell principles and the brain principles that I love so much too? Because for me, the body is the divine. And so, and the answer was no. I had to look at what was disconnecting me from the flow of source through my mind and heart. Well, I was still carrying unforgiveness. I was really mad. So then I started the forgiveness experiment where I started to forgive everyone. And that's a story in itself. But I had to really look at that. How was I blocking myself from that frequency, that light frequency? What was blocking my heart and my mind from that high vibration light of the divine? And I really looked at that. And I thought, wow, I'm really thinking some negative stuff sometimes. And so it made me really pay attention to the choice of thought. Could I be mad at A, B, and C all day long? Is it justified, the anger? Absolutely. The anger could be justified with so-and-so and so, A, B, and C. And other people would so not, However, does it make me feel connected? No, it doesn't make me feel connected. My other awareness was intensity is not connection, especially in romantic relationships. I had to really look at, are my interactions focused on the connection of that frequency of the divine, or am I being charmed by another narcissist, right? It's because it's very charming. And am I following old patterns of wanting to be loved by people that mimic my parents in some ways, or the people that can't help me connect to and embrace that divine energy in the intimate realm of romantic relationship? I had to really look at that, because I have manifested a lot of people that are really intense, and they're wonderful people in some ways, but they don't have that ability to really open their heart and connect in a consistent way for whatever reason. So I had to really look at that. I had to really look at my addiction to sugar. That was a big one for me because I was so sensitive. I have very weak genetics in some areas, and I had to be so honest with myself. Was I following my cell principles? No, because I loved popcorn and I loved chocolate, and I was still eating them, and I had a lot of shame about it. But even that little bit was damaging my joints and my brain. I was that sensitive. And so, as we ponder our spiritual walk, and I spent a lot of time thinking about it, because I know that without my walk with spirit, my life would look so much differently, and I don't have a chance without that connection to spirit. My darkness from the past will eat me alive. I have a lot of wonderful spiritual people in my life that are really warriors in some way, because they living a metaphysical life is not easy. It often involves stepping away from what is considered normal. I always wanted to find a box I fit in. And I never, even now as a chiropractor, doing all my healing work, and even at, being a bi-gender, because I always felt like a male inside of a girl body. I never found the box, so I gave up. I was like, okay. But living a metaphysical life often means we abandon the principles that society is based on. And that's not easy. It's not easy to not have a box to fit in. But for me, the box meant death. I couldn't exist in the darkness. The box, I tried that. I tried to acquire all the real estate and focus on the outside and do all the pretty things, but that didn't bring me the joy. When I look back, and I'm a determined individual, and thank God I am, because, I have a lot of grit. I have some talent, but not as talented as many people I see. But I don't give up, so I'll give myself that. And so, of all the achievements, if you look at the bio, I've done some stuff. When I think, what is my greatest achievement? It's not the degrees. It's not the books. It's not whatever I create. It's not that. It's that I can laugh. Like I can laugh from my soul. Like that's my greatest achievement of my life, to be able to really laugh. And so as I embrace my people, my core people, my spiritual family, and certainly Jeremy's one of them. And I watch how they live their lives. And these spiritual warriors, they usually are driven and guided by this creative force of some kind to express the divine frequency through their hearts and their gifts. And I have a very talented friend who's one of the most amazing singers in the county, and he's on the news, and we often have conversations about the darkness. You know, he went through a lot of trauma as a kid, so he understands that piece of it, how kind of that blackness kind of sits in your consciousness somewhere. And unless you're really doing the work, the blackness then grows bigger. So it's either a speck that you don't really think about, or it's really big if you're not really actively in this motion of the spiritual healing. And so I was like, you know, we were talking about the big visions we have, the big callings in our life, and how sometimes we wish that we didn't have them. We wish you could just live a simple life and not be driven by these greater things we want to do for the universe. And he said, well, it doesn't work that way. And this person, like I said, he doesn't have a box either. And so, you know, he said, if you don't keep in motion, then the darkness catches you. And I really thought about that when we're really called to do something with our hearts. Whether it be, you know, whatever is yours to do will call you. Whether that be to be an amazing artist or an amazing speaker, or to create things with technology, or to love a child, or to create a nonprofit, or whatever it might be, to write a book, or to show up for your family in a certain way. Whatever that is calling you, if you do not follow the calling, it will start to eat away at something. Like you'll start to churn about it. And then it will create chaos in your life. And so I have found that if I don't listen, then nothing will work. So now when I get the intuitive download of doing something, I'm like, okay, universe. And it's usually something really outlandish that doesn't fit my life, that I have to take the action no matter what. Because I know that if I don't, it'll keep talking to me, and then ultimately it'll create chaos somewhere, and it'll trip me up, and I'll have to do it anyway. So I've gotten smarter. But that's what he said. And he's very, very talented, probably the most talented singer I've ever met. And he does amazing things out in the community, both with his heart and with his gift. And so I always remember that when we're really called, it will keep calling. You know, if it's yours, the stuff that I've been working on now that I'm finally launching and doing, I heard like 25 years ago, if it's really yours, then it will always find you. Always. And so this power and the presence of what unity is built on, that power and presence is so incredibly powerful. And so I go through my human moments. So, you know, within the last few years, I have a story of it was right before my birthday. And I was sick. And I was like, all right, I'll just do my little stuff or whatever, and I'll be fine. Well, I wasn't fine. And little did I know, I was in a room that was infested with black mold, so that's part of the reason why I wasn't getting better. But I was laying there, and then it was Monday, and my birthday celebrations were on Saturday, like Friday and Saturday. And each day, I was like in my bed, couldn't get up, sick. And I was like, all right, God, what's going on here? I'm not supposed to be sick. I've spent my whole life studying cells and healing. I'm using all my tools here, or a lot of them. What's going on? And then the day would go by, and I was so sick, like I could barely get out of bed. And I was like, and so my angels came. I was like in a moment of, all right, and they showed me this book that was on my nightstand, and I don't remember the title, but it was a unity book about healing in Myrtle Fillmore. So they showed me the book, and I was like, oh, I forgot to call my angels in to help heal me and to show me the steps. I kept thinking that my brain was going to show me. And that's not how that's not how metaphysics and unity works. I know I love the brain, trust me, I love the brain. I love the idea of acquiring knowledge and creating with it and doing with it. But ultimately, there's something magical when we really surrender and say, okay, universe, okay, angels, okay, divine spirit, universe, whatever we label that energy, please help me here. Show me my next steps. Because no matter how many thousands of more books I read, and I'm a nerd, so I love books, that's never going to give me the precise spirit-led information that will always lead me in the best way. So when I was laying there so sick, I saw the book, I started reading, and I remembered Myrtle Fillmore. The magic of calling that presence in, because we are that presence. We are the miracle of the divine. The cell is the first incarnation of the divine. We are the divine. And so it's 1 in 42 trillion chance that we arrive on this planet. Do you know how big a trillion is? I had to look it up. It's 1,000,000 times 1,000,000. That's a lot. And what was the statistic on how many cells are in the body? 37.2 trillion cells are in our body. Those are all little tiny pockets of the divine all around us, moving around, doing stuff. And so my question is, how are you going to use the divine energy in this moment, that frequency flowing through you today, tomorrow, this week? How are you going to be the expression of the divine through you? Because every moment we have the ability to touch someone's life. Every moment we have the ability to love bigger, whether it be ourselves and the things we do to be stronger for other people, or somebody that's just in front of us, or an animal or a child. We have that moment to get out and serve with our hearts, even when we're walking through stuff, even when we're struggling, in our own lives. And so I think about Dina, my friend, and how much it meant that every single time she stuck her chair in that sand and sat there and was so happy to be a part of a special moment for me, and what that meant to my heart, and all of the moments that my friends have shown up and loved me through the worst moments of my life. And the power of that energy, even when my brain wasn't telling me that anything was ever going to happen, even when everything around me was in chaos, somehow the more that I applied the rhythm of connecting to that energy, things started to shift. Even if it meant putting on my shoes and just going for a walk outside, even if it meant just breathing and clearing my mind for a minute in meditation, or putting on a Louise Hayes recording, or reading a metaphysical book, or listening to spiritual leaders online, or music. So my question to you today is, how do you connect to that divine frequency? How do you connect to it to make you feel so cozy in your heart and feeling light in your mind and in your heart? What is your avenue of embracing that energy? For me, I found it in cells in the human body throughout my life, but also music. Music was a sacred thing. I love walking by the water, animals, kitty cats. I lost my kitty. She was 23 3/4. And she was the love of my life. But the connection that I had with that animal was such a sacred, divine thing. And so whenever you feel wobbly, just reach for a spiritual, metaphysical tool, because they're there. And for me, it always gave me hope. Because when I was in that darkness and that blackness, I didn't have any hope for a lot of years. But even when I was in front of all those doctors that told me my brain would never work normally, whether it be the severe depression or, literally, it could not function. I could not function day to day with the brain that I had. Even in those moments, I kept remembering the unity principles. I kept remembering that the power and presence will always carry us through, that I was the divine, and that the divine, the energy and power of the divine could do anything. And that meant bring me back, even when everybody said that I wouldn't come back. It is a miracle, and we all have those miracles pending in our lives. And it's that relationship with that sacred energy and the interaction with it. Whatever that sacred thing is for you, the interaction of you with that divine energy will carry you through if you just have faith. Thank you so much for allowing me to be here.